OWS fam, the nation, my dudes and dudettes. Welcome back to Best Ball Plus, presented by 1 Week Season. If you have been around for a while, you know the most common question that is asked and thrown around this time of year is, when do I draft? When do I draft my best ball portfolio? Do I draft a chunk of them now when we have very little information? Do we draft after we see camp? Do we draft after we see preseason? When do we draft? My short answer is draft whenever the hell you want. But that comes with one specific caveat, and that is we absolutely must be optimizing for when we draft. So, without further ado, let's get into the three most important things to consider when drafting best ball in May.
1 Week Season.
Drafting best ball in May. Hell yeah, I am in. I want to do it, and I think you should too. So that's why I wanted to talk about the three most important things to think about or consider when drafting best ball in May. So to answer that question, we need to dig a little bit deeper into what best ball is. We'll do that real quick, and we're not going to dive as deep as I would in a behind the scenes best ball plus training session, but we're going to give you a little taste here of what we do behind the scenes. If you like what you see, if you're curious to dive into the best ball streets, head on over to oneweekseason.com, get signed up for Best Ball and or Best Ball Plus. We have 2 subscriptions for you this season. We've brought the prices down to make them more accessible. Head on over to oneweekseason.com, get signed up for Best Ball or Best Ball Plus, and you'll get the behind the scenes good. But we're gonna give you a little taste here today. So when we're breaking down when to draft in best ball, again, we go back to this idea that we have to be optimizing for when we are drafting. Why is that of paramount importance here? Well, primarily we'll say this game, we have to understand this game that we're playing. And this game that we are playing in best ball is considered, for those that are familiar with game theory, is considered a Bayesian game. Now, what is a Bayesian game? A Bayesian game is effectively a game of incomplete information. So what pieces of incomplete information do we have when we're playing best ball? One, we don't know the actions of the other 11 people in our confined draft room. We don't know what decisions they are going to make. If you were drafting before the schedule released, you didn't know the schedule, for God's sake. We don't know what the effects of changing personnel, changing head coaches, changing offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, changing all kinds of stuff behind the scenes. We don't know what that's going to shake out to be. We have an idea based on previous tendencies, but we don't know for certain what these teams are going to look like, how they're going to behave, what their tendencies are going to be. We don't know what the new meta of the NFL is going to be this season. We've seen this ebb and flow, this mystical dance between offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators through the entire history of the NFL. We went through, think back to like the Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger heyday, where their teams were throwing the football 40 plus times every game. Now we're seeing passing come down. Why is that? Well, defensive coordinators have adjusted and are playing more too high coverages and alignments. So we're seeing heavier rush rates. We're seeing less throwing. We're seeing a muted pace of play. So this dance, what is that going to look like this season? We don't know. There's so much uncertainty in best ball. You think about the combinations of players that we can select on a roster. If we broke down and mathematically derived how many total combinations can be confined to a single roster, the number is borderline infinite. We'll draw a correlation to poker. If you were to shuffle a deck of cards, and I've used this example before, but if you were to shuffle a deck of cards, the total number of combinations of what that shuffle will be is on the order of 52 factorial. So already borderline infinite. You look at poker and the presence of game theory optimal, which those who know me, been around here for a little bit, know I come from a poker background. What is game theory optimal? Game theory optimal is effectively telling us, taking the knowns of previous action, of hole cards, of the board, of the flop to turn the river, and diagnosing and giving you a range of what your actions should be. Similar story for best ball in that we don't know all these pieces of uncertainty. We don't know what the weather is going to be like in week 15, 16, 17. We don't know for certain what the optimal way to approach this game is. We have theoretical optimal practices that are mathematically backed. We know that we should be confining our roster constructions to a theoretically optimal range. We know that there are these guidelines of positional allocation through certain rounds, but we don't know for certain. It's impossible to decipher for certain what those truths are. So all of these uncertainties that are present in this game make this a game of incomplete information. So the first most important thing to consider when drafting best ball in May is this time versus information equation. So time and information go together, and they should influence our decisions in this Bayesian game that we are playing of incomplete information. Why is that? Well, as the spring progresses into the summer and then into the fall, we're going to be getting more and more information on these teams. The depth charts are going to shake out a little bit. Rookies, we're going to get beat reports out of camp and out of OTAs. How are these rookies looking? How are they being mixed into the fold? What are the new quarterbacks? How are they looking in camp and preseason? All this stuff, we're going to get more and more information. We're going to get beat reports out of camp about how an offense is looking, how it's designed. So with the more and more information, that should dictate and guide our decision-making process throughout the summer. So we shouldn't have a static draft pattern or a game plan if we're drafting in May versus if we're drafting in the first couple weeks of September before opening day. So this first most important thing to consider when drafting best ball in May is this time and information equation. So what does that mean to us as we're drafting here in May? We have the least amount of information that we're going to have for the rest of this draft cycle. So that should lead us into the second most important thing to consider when drafting best ball in May, which is variance. Variance, quite plainly, we can classify that as all of the things that we do not have control over. We have control over our decisions in the draft. We don't have control over the decisions of the other 11 people in the draft. We don't have control over things like the weather. We don't have control over offensive tendencies versus defensive tendencies, the meta. We don't have control over injuries. There's so much in this game that we don't have control over, and we just classify that chunk of things as variance. So variance ties into this time and information equation. You can think about it as a linear scale. As we get more and more information, we should be exposing ourselves to less and less variance. So what does that mean? Back that up to where we are right now in May. That means we should be okay, and we should actively be seeking to embrace additional variance. So we have a little bit more leeway to stray from those guidelines that we have theoretically, optimally, and mathematically been proven. Well, they are theory. We can't prove them for certain. So like, we know that the best roster construction for advancement rate is either 2-5-8-3, so 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 8 wide receivers, and 3 tight ends, or 2-5-8-3 or 3-5-8-2. Sorry, 2-5-8-3 or 3-5-8-2. So we know now, if we are going to stray from that generalized guideline of roster construction, the best time to do so is now. So I've caught a lot of flack, and again, this is theoretics. I've caught a lot of flack in the past for these wonky roster constructions that I post early on in the draft season, and this is why. Like, I'm okay running out 4 running back rosters. I'm okay running out 10 wide receiver rosters. The time to do that, though, is now, because as variance pertains to this time and information puzzle, we should be embracing additional variance now. That also ties into things like ADP. ADP, we know, is fluid throughout the spring, summer, and fall. It's going to change. It's going to ebb and flow. It's going to come and go. ADP being fluid means that as the spring turns into summer, turns into fall, we should be getting closer and closer to sticking to ADP. Back that up again right now, we don't have to be really worried too much about ADP. We can reach rounds, multiple rounds. It doesn't necessarily affect expected value. And this buzz phrase of closing line value versus ADP has been thrown around over the past few years. That is important, but that brings us into the third most important thing to consider when drafting best ball in May, and that is volume. So these theoretical optimal practices, they are truth if we assume infinite volume. That is very important. So game theory optimal, again, back to the poker, we'll draw a correlation there. Game theory optimal, one of the assumptions is an infinite sample size. So if we were able to run a computer simulation for this season and we had infinite sample size of rosters to build, we would see that the EV is greatest for things like 2583, 3582 roster construction. We would see that the EV is greatest for things like quarterback paired with a pass catcher plus another pass catcher being the tight end. We would see that the EV is increased for quarterback running back pass catcher correlations. All these things assume an infinite sample size. So bringing all those three things together, we know that we don't have an infinite sample size. We have, last year I drafted about 1,000 teams, and that's on the heavier side. I know a lot of you listening are not drafting 1,000 teams this season. If you are, that's great. You have a bigger volume, a bigger sample size to work with. You're getting closer to infinite, but 1,000 is not close at all to infinite. So all of these things, we know we don't have an infinite sample. We have 1,000 drafts or 100 drafts or 10 drafts. If you're only drafting 10 drafts, like that's totally fine. You just have to realize what that means for how you approach this game that we're playing. So bring all those things together. We know we don't have an infinite sample size. We know we have to be concerned about variance on this sliding scale of variance, highest variance being now, lowest variance being right before the kickoff of the NFL season. And all of that comes together through time and information. So to highlight those three things, and again, the three most important things to consider when drafting best ball in May: time and information, variance, and volume. So we're going to do a little exercise now. I have drafted one BBM team this season. It was before the NFL schedule release. We're going to look at that draft and see kind of how we tie in those three things into what we're talking about here. So I'll bring up the draft. I will caveat this with, I am sorry, there was a mistake made. If you look at my first round pick, that was a misclick. So I'm drafting out of the 1.02 here. Misclick on Ashton Jeanty. That was completely a mistake that happened drafting on the mobile application. I got the old trickarooski where you see like it doesn't load the player. You click on a player's name and his picture, and the player loads like 5 or 6 picks below where that player was listed. So I clicked on Saquon Barkley. He showed up like at the 8th pick in the queue, and I clicked draft and thought I was drafting Saquon Barkley, and it drafted Ashton Jeanty. But we adapted and overcame. So that's the caveat with this draft. I'm sorry, Ashton Jeanty. I would not take him 1.02. But yeah, that's increasing variance for sure. But that was a mistake, and that was that's the story on that. So let's look at this draft real quick. We see I'm drafting out of the 102. I take a misclicked rookie running back at the 102. And within those broad guidelines of roster construction and stuff, we're not going to get into optimal theory of those, but we will say drafting a rookie running back at 102, I'm almost certainly going wide receiver heavy for the rest of the next 6 rounds for the first 7 rounds. So that will influence my decision here at the 2-3 turn. You'll see I'll go Tyreek Hill and Garrett Wilson. So this was an interesting decision point for me. Tyreek Hill was one of my primary targets here at this turn. So he fell to me a little bit. He's I beat ADP by a couple picks. Again, ADP is fluid and it's not as important here as we're sitting here in May. So I take Tyreek Hill, and immediately I'm thinking, I don't know the schedule. Again, I drafted this before the NFL schedule release, but there are things that we can do to stay closer to optimal theory. We know that optimal theory dictates the highest expected value is going to come from week 17 in these playoff style contests. So week 17 playoff correlation 15, 16, 17 is highly important to our expected value bottom line. And if we look at the hierarchy of expected value, the highest expected value contributor is week 17, followed by advancement rate, followed by week 16, followed by week 15 in these contests. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking week 17 correlations. I'm thinking advancement rate. How do I make it out of my draft? Because I'm not winning shit if I don't. And then I'm thinking rest of playoff correlation for week 16 and week 15. So I take Tyreek Hill. He's fallen to me. I know I want another wide receiver here. And then I see Garrett Wilson. And Garrett Wilson, this would be classified as a reach, quote unquote, per ADP. But Garrett Wilson, what does he have that ties him to Tyreek Hill? Divisional opponents. So I drafted this before the NFL schedule was released. And I knew that the recent bias or the recent tendencies of the NFL schedule makers is that they prioritize divisional matchups later in the season. Why? These games mean something still. They want to keep the fans engaged in watching football. So we've seen a higher rate of divisional matchups later in the season. So now I'm targeting the AFC East. That's kind of the theme of this roster now. So I have Tyreek Hill. I take Garrett Wilson. On the way back in round 4, you'll see I take Jalen Waddle. So already I'm piling on to the uncertainty here. I'm embracing additional variance. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle are coming off of down years. Why is that? Tua Tagovailoa got hurt again. We also saw atrocious offensive line play from the Miami Dolphins that kind of forced Mike McDaniel to change his scheme up and target these quick hits. And that is why Jonnu Smith had the year that he had. So with improved offensive line play, again, we don't know, but with improved offensive line play, it stands to reason that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are set up well for bounce back seasons. Again, this goes into uncertainty, but I'm placing myself in the best position to maximize my expected value should their offensive line play improve, should Tua Tagovailoa stay healthy, should Mike McDaniel be able to dial up more intermediate and downfield work for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So that's the uncertainty, the variance that I'm embracing in this time versus information equation. In round 5, the second rookie running back here in RJ Harvey in Denver. Why am I targeting RJ Harvey so heavily at this time of year? Some would say he is a running back dead zone pick. While that's not entirely false, I think by come August, September, he could be up in the 3rd round and not be a running back dead or a RB dead zone pick. But why is that? So the Denver Broncos had the top run blocking offensive line from 2024, better than the Eagles, believe it or not. RJ Harvey steps into a situation where Javonte Williams is gone. They have a former undrafted free agent. They have a former 6th round pick on the roster behind him. They invested heavy draft capital. I love RJ Harvey here in the 5th, 6th round range. So I take him, and already you see my running back stable is 2 rookie running backs. And you'll see as this draft progresses, I'm not going to take a running back for quite a while. So embracing additional variance, we don't know, is Ashton Jeanty going to be utilized as a workhorse? We assume he is, but we don't know. We don't know how the backfield is going to shake up in Denver. I mean, they're coming off a season where they had a ton of injuries. They utilized running back rotations. Javonte Williams wasn't the guy as he was in previous seasons. How is this Denver Broncos, New Orleans, thinking former head coach there. How is this Denver Broncos team offense going to utilize their running backs? So additional variance here in that RJ Harvey pick. Bringing it around in round 6 and 7, I am embracing additional variance here by keeping my running back stable, just anchored by those two rookie running backs, layering on more upside wide receivers. And the first is Chris Olave. Why do I like Chris Olave? I mean, dude, first of all, we'll talk about the uncertainty with the situation. They have 4 quarterbacks that are all going to be auditioning for the starting quarterback role after Derek Carr retired. They signed a former guy. He got in trouble for sports wagering or something, and then played his final collegiate season in JUCO. They just signed him, and they have a rookie and 2 holdovers from last year at the quarterback position. Like, we have no idea who's going to start, but what I do like is we have a Kellen Moore coming in for the head coach, and we know that he likes to run a pace up offense. We know that he likes to keep pressure on opposing defenses. We could see additional play volume in New Orleans, Chris Olave is the clear alpha wide receiver for that team. So embracing the variance there, also layering on additional variance with taking an additional wide receiver. And you'll see I'll take another one here that ties into me attacking AFC East in Stephon Diggs. Variance off the charts with Stephon Diggs, older, aging wide receiver coming off a torn ACL, but he has a second-year quarterback that's proven to be at least at least coherent behind under center there in Drake May. So Stephon Diggs, current reports are he's likely to be ready for week 1, but he had an October ACL tear, and at 33 plus years of age, we don't know if he will be, but it is my way of attacking the AFC East here. And then we get into something that a lot of people, a lot of analysts in the industry will classify as a mistake. And I will say yes in a vacuum per if we had an infinite sample size. Doubling up on quarterback at the 8-9 turn is a mistake. That is a hit to expected value 100%. But this is me embracing additional variance in a way that gets me access to 2 things. Justin Fields, pairing him with Garrett Wilson, and Bo Nix, pairing him with RJ Harvey. So what are the things that I talked about? 2 examples I gave earlier are a quarterback, running back, pass catcher pairing correlation, and a quarterback, pass catcher, tight end correlation. You'll see both of those come into play here with this setup. So I take Justin Fields and Bo Nix at the 8-9 turn. Justin Fields, sure, he signed one of the cheapest starting quarterback contracts this offseason, 2 years. Sure, he has not been able to lead a functioning offense. But on the flip side, he was quarterback 4 in points, fantasy points per dropback last season, was top 5 in 2023. So we know that he is a good fantasy quarterback, has upside for those spike weeks. Bo Nix, similar story we talked about for RJ Harvey, like the offense, like the coaching staff, like the offensive line. And Bo Nix is uber talented, brings some semblance of dual threat ability. Over half of his games last season, he scored 4 or more fantasy points on the ground alone. So like that for upside. Again, embracing additional variance. I normally would not double tap quarterback at the 8-9 turn, but this is my way of embracing additional variance in a time frame when we should be looking to do so. In round 10 and 11, I already have two quarterbacks. I have 2 running backs. I have 5 wide receivers at this point: Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, and Stephon Diggs. So I know I need to pay some attention to the tight end position at this point. And who falls to me but Evan Ingram? So this completes my quarterback, running back, tight end stack for the Broncos. And then I bring it back with a rookie tight end that has all kinds of uncertainty from Indianapolis from Tyler Warren. Jesus Christ, it is late. Tyler Warren, man, this was one of the more head-scratching picks of the first couple of rounds for me. The Colts have utilized a 3 to 4 man rotation at the position for the past 2 seasons. We know that this offense has all kinds of uncertainty under center. I mean, okay. I don't know if I buy Anthony Richardson is going to be pushed by Daniel Jones. Like, Daniel Jones is a replacement level talent. Um, this is, to me, Anthony Richardson's team. They brought in a backup quarterback because of Anthony Richardson's injury history, and this is my opinion, that can at least do some of the same stuff that Anthony Richardson can do so that they don't have to change the offense so drastically as we've seen the previous 2 seasons. I mean, 2023 with Joe Flacco, they had to change everything. They go from this hypermobile quarterback rookie, head on fire, to like the most statuesque guy in the league, 41 years old at the time, or 40 years old at the time, I believe. 39, I don't know, man. He was old. And same thing happened last year. They had to go from Anthony Richardson, again, second-year quarterback, hair on fire, mobile, dual threat, to this statuesque backup level quarterback play. It was also interesting to me. I'm actually going to write something, I think, on this situation because I wanted to look at the tendencies of the offensive play calling in Indianapolis. And what I found was they started the season, I think, trying to develop Anthony Richardson into they wanted to develop his pocket presence and his ability to hang in the pocket and throw. Because, like, I think what are they trying to do? They're like trying to make another Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. And you don't get to be that until you're able to sling a football accurately. Yeah, like Anthony Richardson, the worst of qualifying quarterbacks, the worst completion rate, the highest ADOT. So that's a very interesting mix for this now Tyler Warren rookie tight end to come in. But they invested heavy capital. And if they change up those tendencies, the uncertainty here, if they change up those tendencies from last season, if they brought in a big target, big bodied target for Anthony Richardson to help develop those short area woes, there's potential there for Tyler Warren to have a very, very successful fantasy season here. So I double tap tight end. This is very, very non-standard. Rounds 8 through 11, 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends. Very, very non-standard. Again, embracing additional variance here when I know that I have the leeway to do so. Then I'll bring it back with Joshua Palmer. And ding, 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 here is team number 4 in the AFC East. Again, by the time you're listening to this, this is after the schedule release. I drafted this before. I'm targeting the AFC East on this roster. Joshua Palmer was the most cost-effective way for me to gain exposure to the Buffalo Bills, the final AFC East team. Now, Joshua Palmer steps into an interesting situation because we kind of know exactly who Joshua Palmer is, and that kind of meshes fairly well with what the Bills need. They need this field stretcher, this downfield option. They need a Z-type wide receiver that can also run effective routes. They've had a Z-type wide receiver, Mac Hollins. Some of these other guys they've had over the previous 4 or 5 years, they haven't necessarily had a Z-type wide receiver that can also run effective routes. But they get one in Joshua Palmer, and they get him in a cost-efficient manner. So I like Joshua Palmer here in the 12th round because of the overall composition of this roster. Then I go Cedric Tillman, double tap the wide receivers here. And I like Cedric Tillman for a reason that you can see at the bottom of my screen here, because you can pair him with Deontay Johnson extremely cheaply right now. So you get the 1A and the 1B wide receivers on an NFL team that we have all kinds of uncertainty. You talk about a team with 4 quarterbacks. That is the Cleveland Browns this season. They have an aging veteran, welcome back. They have 2 rookie quarterbacks, and then they have the mistake that shall not be named. So all kinds of uncertainty. The offensive line has undergone massive changes. They struggled with injuries last year. It affected the run game, forced them to pass. Now they have 3 new starters along the offensive line this season, and we don't know what's going on under center, at quarterback. All kinds of uncertainty, but I love gaining cheap access to this kind of double pump, double stack with Cedric Tillman and Deontay Johnson. In round 14 and 15, you'll see me go Roshan Johnson. Now, this was one I want to spend a couple minutes and talk about here in Roshan Johnson. Roshan Johnson just might be this year's, and I hate fucking doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Might just be this year's David Montgomery. We have former offensive coordinator from the Detroit Lions coming over to be the head coach of the Chicago Bears. This is a team who invested heavily in the draft and free agency along their offensive line. Why? Caleb Williams was under pressure. He had one of the highest pressure rates last season. He was unable to develop as a NFL quarterback because he was just constantly under pressure, escaping the pocket. Excuse me, having to do this magic Patrick Mahomes stuff that he's just wasn't capable of doing at that point in his career. So they have all these changes in Chicago. Roshan Johnson, I thought he was drafted to be the goal line back and the change of pace guy. They kind of used him that way for a little bit of last season, then didn't, and then did again. It was all over the map with DeAndre Swift there. But now, with the change in structure, with the change in head coach, offensive coordinator, I think we just might see Roshan Johnson utilized similar way to how David Montgomery was last season. So that is goal line work, that is change of pace work, that is taking some early down work. All kinds of good stuff could happen with Roshan Johnson this year. So I take him as the RB3 on this roster. And then you'll see bringing it back together. I have the quarterback for the Jets. I have the alpha pass catcher. And now I take another rookie tight end here in Mason Taylor. We don't know what the Jets tight end room is going to look like this season, but we do know that Tyler Conklin is no longer in town. We do know that they drafted Mason Taylor in a semi-premium pick there. So Mason Taylor completes my quarterback, pass catcher, tight end stack, and again, a way of increasing expected value through roster construction. Finishing us out here with this roster, I only have 3 running backs, so I know at least 2 of these final 3 picks are going to be running back. I take Blake Corum. Why? We know the offensive tendencies out of Los Angeles with the Rams. We know they prefer to utilize a primary running back, alpha running back, workhorse, borderline workhorse running back, if you will. So if something happens ahead of him on the depth chart, we can get some significant upside here in Blake Corum. Same thing, we were drafting him, same reasons we were drafting him last year. Pure cuff here in Blake Corum. I don't expect him to contribute any fantasy relevant weeks without an injury. And we saw it last year. We saw him be the starter for 1 game, and he saw borderline workhorse usage. Then there's Deontay Johnson around 17, and I finish it off with Kendre Miller. Oh, man. Everybody's favorite head scratcher from last season. Coach's worst enemy. I don't know what he did to piss off coaching staff there in New Orleans last year, but he is technically second on the depth chart behind an aging veteran running back in Alvin Kamara, and he might see standalone usage and then gets that upside should something happen to Alvin Kamara there. And again, attacking a change in offensive philosophy there with Kellen Moore in New Orleans. So you'll see I ended up with a 2-5-8-3 build. So within the guidelines of proven theoretical optimal, again, theoretical optimal assumes an infinite sample, which we don't have, but we know that that is the most effective way of increasing advancement rate. And we know that advancement rate is the second highest contributor to expected value. So I like to stay within those confines as much as possible. If I'm deviating, I'm going to be doing more of that deviating now and staying stricter to those guidelines as we get closer to the kickoff of regular season. So 2 quarterbacks, we had Justin Fields and Bo Nix. 5 running backs, we have Ashton Jeanty, RJ Harvey, Roshan Johnson, Blake Corum, and Kendre Miller. We have 8 wide receivers, Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, Joshua Palmer, Cedric Tillman, and Deontay Johnson. And then we got them 3 tight ends in Evan Ingram, Tyler Warren, and Mason Taylor. So you start to see how I bring in some of those things that we talked about, the 3 most important things to consider when drafting best ball in May, which were the time and information equation, variance, and volume. Y'all, that was a blast. Welcome back to the best ball season. We are here, 2025, baby. Again, I am Hilow. If you don't know where to find me on Twitter at HilowFF. Head on over to oneweekseason.com. Get signed up for Best Ball Plus. Get access to all this good stuff that we got running behind the scenes. And until next time, y'all, we'll see you in them draft lobbies. I can't wait to see you at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.
1 week season.